You think I walked alone by choice? I never needed anyone to walk beside me.
You don't have to now. We're with you.
A disabled Marine walked by. Minutes later, the SEALs made them regret it. The construction workers' cruel laughter echoed across the Houston street as they mocked the disabled woman's uneven gait, calling her a broken toy soldier for everyone to hear. They had no idea that Sergeant Ava Morgan had sacrificed her leg saving an entire SEAL team in Fallujah, and when those same SEALs recognized her walking past their observation post, the reckoning that followed would teach everyone the true meaning of respect and heroism. Ava Morgan's prosthetic leg caught slightly on the uneven sidewalk as she made her way past the construction site, trying to ignore the workers' increasingly loud comments about her Disability Act. In 3 minutes, 7 Navy SEALs would emerge from their black SUVs to remind everyone exactly what price real heroes pay for their service and why mockery of the wounded was about to become the most expensive mistake these men would ever make. The Houston heat shimmered off the asphalt like liquid mercury, transforming the downtown construction zone into a furnace where hard hats and safety vests became instruments of torture for the workers who labored under the merciless Texas sun. The skeletal framework of what would become another glass tower stretched toward the cloudless sky, while jackhammers and diesel engines created a symphony of urban progress that drowned out most conversation except for the loudest voices. Food trucks lined the nearby streets, their vendors calling out lunch specials to workers whose sweat-soaked shirts testified to the brutal conditions that made even the shade feel like an oven. Ava Morgan moved through the crowded sidewalk with the careful precision of someone who had learned to navigate the world with one leg made of flesh and bone and another crafted from titanium and determination. At 31 years old, her weathered face carried lines that spoke of experiences far beyond her years, while her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail that emphasized the alert awareness in her eyes, the same vigilance that had kept her alive through 3 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. The prosthetic that replaced her left leg below the knee was state-of-the-art military issue, but it still required conscious effort to maintain the rhythm that most people took for granted. Her morning walk to the VA Medical Center was both physical therapy and psychological challenge, forcing her to confront a world that often saw her disability before recognizing her humanity. The small backpack she carried contained the paperwork for another round of medical evaluations, psychological assessments, and bureaucratic procedures that had become the new battlefield of her civilian life. Ava's apartment was a sparse efficiency unit in a neighborhood where rent was cheap and questions were rarely asked, populated by other veterans immigrants and people who had learned to value privacy over comfort. Her military disability benefits covered basic necessities, but they couldn't purchase the sense of purpose and brotherhood that had defined her identity for 8 years of active duty service. The daily challenge that Ava faced wasn't just physical rehabilitation or adapting to life with a prosthetic limb. It was confronting a society that alternated between pity and suspicion when dealing with disabled veterans, especially women who had served in combat roles. The construction site represented a microcosm of attitudes that ranged from respectful acknowledgement to outright hostility, depending on the education and character of the individuals she encountered. Today's walk would test her ability to maintain dignity in the face of ignorance. While unknown to her, it would also trigger a confrontation that would fundamentally change how she saw herself and how others would forever view the price of military service. Ava's decision to take the same route to her VA appointment, despite previous uncomfortable encounters with the construction crew, represented a choice between convenience and avoidance that had broader implications for her psychological recovery. The alternative route would add 20 minutes to her walk and require navigating stairs that were difficult with her prosthetic. But it would also mean allowing intimidation to dictate her movements through her own neighborhood. Her military training had emphasized that tactical retreat was sometimes necessary, but surrendering territory without cause was a form of defeat that could establish patterns of avoidance and fear. The construction site represented one small patch of civilian ground where she had every right to walk unmolested, and avoiding it would validate the workers' implied claim that she didn't belong in their space. The opportunity for confrontation had been building for weeks as the same group of workers had made increasingly bold comments about her appearance and walking style, emboldened by her lack of response and their assumption that she was powerless to challenge their behavior. Their confidence in their immunity from consequences was based on their numbers, their physical presence, and their assumption that a disabled woman would never have the resources or support necessary to hold them accountable. Ava's choice to continue using the sidewalk that passed directly through their work zone was both practical necessity and quiet defiance, representing her refusal to be driven from public spaces by ignorance and cruelty. Ava's strategy for managing the daily harassment involved the same emotional discipline that had served her during combat operations, compartmentalizing the psychological impact while maintaining focus on her primary mission of reaching her medical appointments and completing her rehabilitation program. Her approach required suppressing natural defensive reactions while projecting confidence that she often didn't feel. The plan also involved timing her walks to minimize exposure to the workers during their break periods when they were most likely to engage in hostile behavior, though the construction schedule made this difficult to predict with accuracy. Her route planning considered factors like crowd density, escape routes, and the presence of potential witnesses who might intervene if harassment escalated to physical confrontation. Most importantly, Ava's strategy included maintaining her connection to her military identity through small acts of discipline and bearing that reminded her of who she had been before the injury and who she could still become despite her current circumstances. Her posture, pace, and awareness remained military in character, even when her confidence was shaken by civilian encounters that challenged her sense of worth and belonging. The approach required constant vigilance and emotional control that was exhausting to maintain, but it also preserved her dignity while avoiding confrontations that might create additional problems with law enforcement or medical personnel who were monitoring her psychological adjustment to civilian life. Ava's first attempt to address the harassment directly had involved making eye contact with the workers and acknowledging their presence with a slight nod, hoping that recognizing their humanity might encourage them to recognize hers in return. The strategy had backfired by providing them with confirmation that their comments were being heard and had impact encouraging escalation rather than promoting mutual respect. Her second approach had involved adjusting her route to pass by the construction site during shift changes when the workers were distracted by their own transitions rather than focused on harassing passers-by. This tactical modification had been partially successful, but had also required complicated timing that made her appointments more difficult to keep punctually. The failure of these diplomatic approaches had forced Ava to consider more assertive responses, including filing complaints with the construction company or involving law enforcement in what was essentially a harassment campaign that was affecting her daily life and psychological recovery. Her reluctance to escalate reflected both her military training in conflict de-escalation and her concern that complaints might make her appear weak or unable to handle civilian challenges. The pattern of harassment had persisted despite her various attempts to manage it, demonstrating that the workers viewed her as a safe target who lacked the resources or support necessary to challenge their behavior effectively. The escalation began on a particularly brutal Tuesday morning when Rick Tanner, the construction site foreman, decided to make Ava's daily passage the entertainment centerpiece of the crew's coffee break. His commentary started with exaggerated mimicking of her gait and escalated to crude speculation about her personal life and fitness for public interaction, delivered with the kind of performative cruelty that invited others to join in the harassment. Tanner's behavior was motivated by his need to establish dominance within his crew and his assumption that targeting someone he perceived as powerless would demonstrate his authority without risking significant consequences. His military-age background had been spent avoiding service, and his attitude toward veterans reflected both ignorance and defensive hostility toward people whose experiences highlighted his own lack of courage and sacrifice. The crew's participation in the harassment ranged from active encouragement to uncomfortable silence, with most workers falling somewhere between complicity and cowardice as they watched their foreman systematically humiliate someone who posed no threat to anyone. Their behavior reflected broader social attitudes about disabled individuals and the assumption that visible vulnerability invited predatory behavior from those seeking easy targets. Ava's response to the escalating harassment remained controlled and dignified, but the psychological impact was cumulative and significant, affecting her sleep appetite and willingness to engage in social activities that required navigating public spaces where similar encounters might occur. The harassment attracted attention from various observers, including other pedestrians who witnessed the daily spectacle but chose not to intervene. Business owners who could see the construction site from their establishments but prioritized avoiding conflict over protecting vulnerable individuals, and most significantly, Logan Beck, a former Navy SEAL who had been conducting surveillance on a nearby building as part of his private security work. Logan's observation of Ava began as routine environmental awareness, but shifted to focused attention when he recognized something familiar in her bearing and movement patterns that suggested military training despite her obvious disability. His professional background had taught him to notice details that civilians missed, and Ava's posture and situational awareness marked her as someone with combat experience, even though her current circumstances suggested vulnerability. The recognition triggered memories that Logan had been suppressing for years. Recollections of a firefight in Fallujah where his SEAL team had been pinned down by insurgent forces and had been saved by the intervention of a Marine who had made multiple trips through enemy fire to evacuate wounded personnel from a burning vehicle. The Marine's final trip had resulted in severe injuries that had ended her deployment, but her actions had saved 5 Navy personnel who had returned home to their families. Logan's growing certainty that Ava was the same Marine who had saved his life created both emotional turmoil and a sense of obligation that would soon transform a routine surveillance operation into a personal mission of recognition and protection. Logan's identification of Ava as the Marine who had saved his life was confirmed when he compared her profile to photographs from the combat action report that had been filed after the Fallujah incident. The documentation included her name unit designation and the details of her actions during the firefight that had earned her a Bronze Star with Valor device, along with medical records showing the injuries that had ended her military career. The confirmation triggered an immediate response from Logan, who contacted his former teammates through encrypted communication channels that were still active years after their military service had ended. The message was simple but urgent. The Marine who had saved their lives was being publicly humiliated by civilians who had no understanding of her service or sacrifice, and immediate intervention was required to address the situation. The response from his former SEAL teammates was immediate and unanimous. They would deploy within minutes to provide whatever support was necessary to protect someone who had earned their eternal gratitude through her courage under fire. Their civilian careers and personal obligations were temporarily suspended as they responded to a call that transcended normal social obligations and entered the realm of military brotherhood that extended beyond active duty service. The deployment of 7 former Navy SEALs to address a construction site harassment incident represented a mobilization of resources that was disproportionate to the immediate threat, but entirely appropriate to the debt they owed to someone who had risked everything to save their lives. The preparation for confronting the construction crew required careful coordination between Logan and his teammates to ensure that their intervention would be effective without creating legal complications or escalating to violence that might harm innocent bystanders. Their approach needed to balance the intimidation factor that would stop the harassment with professional restraint that would avoid criminal charges or negative publicity. Logan's team included former SEALs who now worked in various civilian capacities, but had maintained their physical conditioning and tactical skills through regular training and mutual support networks. Their presence would communicate serious intent, while their discipline would ensure that the confrontation remained within legal bounds that protected both Ava and themselves from adverse consequences. The planning also involved timing the intervention to maximize impact, while minimizing disruption to Ava's daily routine and psychological state. Their goal was to address the harassment permanently while providing her with the recognition and support that her military service had earned, but that civilian life had failed to provide. Most importantly, the preparation required emotional readiness to confront their own feelings about owing their lives to someone who had been struggling in isolation while they had built successful civilian careers, creating a sense of collective guilt that demanded action, regardless of personal convenience or risk. The crisis reached its peak when Rick Tanner's harassment crossed the line from verbal abuse into physical intimidation as he stepped directly into Ava's path and forced her to stop walking, while his crew gathered around to witness what they expected would be her complete humiliation. Tanner's escalation was motivated by his recognition that his previous tactics weren't achieving the level of submission and fear that he wanted to establish over someone he viewed as an easy target. "Hey, Gimp," Tanner called out, his voice loud enough to attract attention from nearby pedestrians and business owners who had been ignoring the daily harassment but couldn't avoid witnessing this direct confrontation. "You think you're some kind of hero with that fake leg? I bet you got that in a car accident and just pretend to be military for the sympathy benefits." The accusation of stolen valor was particularly cruel because it attacked not just Ava's disability, but also her service and sacrifice, suggesting that her injuries were fraudulent and her military background was fabricated for personal gain. The charge resonated with broader societal suspicions about disabled veterans and reflected ignorance about the reality of combat injuries and the military's classification and documentation procedures. Ava's response to the direct confrontation was controlled but visibly emotional, as years of suppressed anger and grief threatened to overwhelm the discipline that had carried her through previous encounters. Her hands trembled slightly as she attempted to step around Tanner, who moved to block her path again while encouraging his crew to record the interaction on their phones for later entertainment and social media posting. The intervention began when 3 black SUVs appeared simultaneously at different points around the construction site, their occupants deploying with the kind of coordinated precision that immediately identified them as military or law enforcement personnel. The vehicles had approached from multiple directions and parked in positions that effectively controlled all entrances and exits from the construction zone, creating a tactical situation that transformed the workers from predators into trapped prey. Logan Beck emerged from the lead vehicle with 6 of his former SEAL teammates, all of them wearing civilian clothes, but moving with the unmistakable bearing and coordination of special operations personnel. Their approach was calm and deliberate, designed to communicate serious intent without creating panic among innocent bystanders who might be caught in the area during the confrontation. "That's enough," Logan announced, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that had once commanded respect in the world's most dangerous combat zones. His words were addressed to Tanner, but were clearly audible to everyone present, creating a moment of absolute silence as the construction crew realized that their entertainment had attracted attention from people who were far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Tanner's reaction to the SEAL's appearance was immediate confusion, followed by defensive aggression as he attempted to maintain his authority over a situation that had suddenly moved far beyond his control or understanding. "This is a private work site," he blustered, trying to project confidence, while obviously intimidated by the presence of men whose physical conditioning and professional bearing marked them as serious threats. Logan's response was a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind of expression that combat veterans used when they were about to deliver consequences that had been a long time coming. "And this is a Marine who saved my life and the lives of my teammates in Fallujah. Show some respect." The revelation that Ava was not just a disabled veteran, but a decorated Marine who had saved the lives of Navy SEALs created an immediate transformation in the atmosphere surrounding the construction site. Logan's testimony carried the weight of personal experience and military brotherhood that transcended civilian authority structures, making Tanner's harassment appear not just cruel, but actively dishonoring someone who had earned recognition rather than ridicule. The moment was made more powerful when Logan produced his military identification and provided specific details about the Fallujah firefight, including the date, location, and circumstances that had led to Ava's injuries while saving his team. His account was corroborated by the other SEALs whose presence served as living testimony to the truth of his claims and the significance of Ava's sacrifice. Ava's own reaction to being recognized was complex, involving relief at finally being acknowledged for her service, but also overwhelming emotion as she was forced to relive memories that she had been trying to suppress since her medical retirement. The recognition validated her identity as a warrior, while also highlighting the cost of her service and the price she had paid for saving others. The transformation from harassment victim to recognized hero was immediate and dramatic, with witnesses realizing they had been observing the systematic abuse of someone whose courage and sacrifice exemplified the highest ideals of military service. Logan's team prepared for a formal recognition ceremony that would honor Ava's service while ensuring that the message about respecting veterans would have lasting impact on everyone who had witnessed the harassment. The preparation involved coordinating with other former military personnel in the area and arranging for appropriate military honors that would demonstrate the significance of her sacrifice. The SEALs also prepared legal documentation that would support any complaints Ava might choose to file against the construction company, while ensuring that their own intervention remained within legal bounds that protected them from criminal or civil liability. Their experience with military justice and civilian law enforcement made them effective advocates for ensuring accountability without creating additional problems. Most importantly, the preparation involved helping Ava process the emotional impact of being publicly recognized for service that she had never expected to discuss with civilians, particularly in circumstances that forced her to confront both her pride in her military accomplishments and her grief about the cost of her sacrifice. The team's approach required balancing immediate justice with longer-term support for someone whose recognition would need to continue beyond the dramatic moment of intervention, ensuring that the respect she received would be sustainable rather than simply temporary sympathy. Despite the SEAL's obvious commitment to honoring her service, Ava struggled with doubts about whether accepting public recognition was worth the emotional cost of reliving traumatic memories and potentially attracting unwanted attention to her private struggle with disability and civilian adjustment. Her military training had emphasized mission completion over personal recognition, and she was uncomfortable with becoming the center of attention. The concern that her story might be sensationalized or misrepresented by media coverage was balanced against the potential benefit of educating the public about the reality of military service and the respect owed to disabled veterans. Her decision would affect not just her own future, but also the treatment of other veterans who faced similar challenges in civilian society. Logan's team provided reassurance based on their own experience with transitioning from military to civilian life, emphasizing that her recognition could help other veterans while providing her with the support network that had been missing from her isolated civilian existence. The climactic moment arrived when Logan formally presented Ava with a Navy SEAL Brotherhood coin, an honor reserved for individuals who had demonstrated extraordinary courage in support of SEAL operations. The presentation took place in full view of the construction crew passers-by, and several smartphones that were recording the encounter for social media distribution. The ceremony was brief but powerful, with each of the 7 SEALs rendering a formal military salute to Ava, while Logan recounted the specific details of her actions in Fallujah and the lives she had saved through her courage under fire. The recognition was both personal acknowledgement of debt owed and public education about the reality of military service and sacrifice. The pressure was intensified by the presence of witnesses who had previously ignored or enabled the harassment, forcing them to confront their own complicity in the systematic abuse of someone whose service had exemplified the values they claimed to support. Ava's initial reaction to the public recognition was overwhelming emotion that threatened to undermine the dignity of the ceremony and her own sense of control over the situation. The combination of painful memories, unexpected validation, and public attention created a perfect storm of psychological pressure that tested her ability to maintain the composure that had carried her through years of civilian challenges. The complexity of her feelings was compounded by the presence of the construction crew whose harassment had triggered the intervention, creating a mixture of vindication and humiliation that was difficult to process in real time. Her response would determine whether the recognition became a source of strength or an additional burden in her ongoing struggle with civilian adjustment. Rick Tanner's attempt to salvage his authority through defensive justifications and half-hearted apologies created additional pressure as Ava was forced to decide whether to accept his expressions of remorse or demand more substantial accountability for his systematic harassment campaign. The decisive moment came when Ava chose to address the construction crew directly, using her recognition as a platform to educate rather than simply accept apologies or demand punishment. Her response demonstrated the leadership qualities that had made her an effective Marine while providing a model for how civilians should treat veterans regardless of their physical condition or current circumstances. "I didn't serve my country for recognition or gratitude," Ava said, her voice carrying clearly across the construction site as she addressed not just the workers, but also the growing crowd of observers who had gathered to witness the confrontation. "I served because I believed in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, and because I wanted to be part of something larger than my own individual concerns." Her words transformed the moment from personal vindication into broader education about military service and the obligations that civilians owed to those who had sacrificed for their protection. The speech demonstrated that her courage hadn't been diminished by her injuries and that her capacity for leadership remained intact despite her struggles with civilian adjustment. The impact on the construction crew was immediate and profound, with several workers openly expressing shame about their previous behavior, while others struggled to process the cognitive dissonance between their assumptions about Ava and the reality of her service and character. The victory was completed when Rick Tanner publicly apologized to Ava and committed to ensuring that the construction site would become a place where veterans were honored rather than harassed. The company's management, alerted by the viral social media coverage of the incident, announced immediate policy changes and Tanner's termination while offering Ava compensation and public recognition of her service. More importantly, the recognition ceremony had attracted attention from local veterans organizations and media outlets that provided Ava with opportunities to share her story and advocate for better treatment of disabled veterans throughout the community. The platform created by the confrontation became the foundation for ongoing work that honored her military service while providing purpose and meaning to her civilian life. The presence of the SEALs had not only stopped immediate harassment, but had also created a support network that would continue beyond the dramatic intervention, ensuring that Ava's recognition would be sustained rather than temporary. The immediate aftermath of the incident saw Rick Tanner fired from his position and blacklisted from construction work in the Houston area, while the construction company implemented comprehensive sensitivity training and hired a veterans liaison to ensure respectful treatment of military personnel. The viral video of Ava's recognition by the SEALs attracted national media attention and sparked conversations about the treatment of disabled veterans throughout the country. Ava received dozens of job offers from companies that valued her military experience and leadership skills, while veterans organizations across Texas invited her to share her story at conferences and community events. The recognition provided her with a sense of purpose and belonging that had been missing from her civilian life, transforming her from an isolated individual into a respected advocate for military families. The construction site where she had been harassed was renamed Heroes Way, in honor of all veterans, with a permanent memorial plaque recognizing their service and sacrifice. The change served as a daily reminder to workers and passers-by about the respect owed to those who had served their country. Ava's story inspired the creation of nonprofit organizations dedicated to supporting disabled veterans transitioning to civilian life, with programs that provided job training, mental health services, and peer support networks. Her advocacy work led to legislative changes that improved disability benefits and healthcare access, while reducing bureaucratic barriers that complicated veterans' lives. The incident also created lasting changes in how civilians interacted with veterans in public spaces, with increased awareness of hidden disabilities and the importance of treating all individuals with dignity, regardless of their physical condition. The education that resulted from Ava's recognition helped bridge the gap between military and civilian communities, while honoring the service of those who had sacrificed for their country. Logan and his SEAL teammates maintained their friendship with Ava, creating a support network that provided both personal connections and professional opportunities as they worked together on veterans advocacy projects that combined their different skills and experiences. 2 years later, Ava stood before a group of young Marines at Parris Island, her prosthetic leg visible beneath her dress uniform, as she spoke about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of serving something greater than oneself. The Brotherhood coin that Logan had given her was prominently displayed on her chest alongside the ribbons and medals that had finally been properly recognized by grateful communities. True strength, she told her audience, isn't about how fast you can run or how much weight you can carry. It's about getting back up every time life knocks you down and helping others do the same.